I was still in uniform when I pulled into my parents' driveway. Not because I wanted to make a statement. I'd come straight from the airport duffel and the trunk dust from Fort Liberty still on my boots. Changing would have meant stopping somewhere else, and I didn't feel like adding another step just to make things easier for people who rarely did the same for me. My mother opened the door before I rang the bell. She glanced at the uniform first, then at my face the way someone checks the weather without really caring what it says. "You didn't have to wear that here," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I didn't pack a runway outfit," I said. "This was convenient." She gave a small smile, already turning back toward the kitchen. The house smelled like roast chicken and lemon cleaner, exactly the same as it had for years. Nothing in that place ever changed unless my sister asked for it. Vanessa's voice floated in from the living room. She was laughing loud and loose the way she always did when she knew she had an audience. "I told you it's not my fault the client changed their mind. That happens all the time." My father murmured something I couldn't hear, but I caught the tone. Reassuring, gentle, the one he never seemed to use with me. I set my bag down by the stairs and walked in. Vanessa was curled up on the couch legs, tucked under her phone in her hand. She looked up and smiled like we'd just run into each other at a grocery store, not like I was her sister who'd flown across the country on limited leave. "Hey," she said. "You're home early." "On time," I said. "My leave started this morning." She nodded, eyes flicking back to her screen. "Must be nice. I haven't had a real break in months." I let that one pass. Arguing about who was more tired had never worked in my favor. I'd learned that early. Dinner was already laid out. My place at the table was at the end, the same one I'd had growing up. Vanessa sat between my parents, close enough that my mother kept reaching over to adjust her napkin or refill her glass without thinking. "So how long are you here?" my father asked, carving the chicken. 5 days, I said. "That's what I could get approved." He nodded as if that explained everything. "That's not much time. It's what I have." Vanessa looked up again. 5 days. Wow. I thought officers had more flexibility. "They do," I said, "depending on the job." She shrugged. "Still, I don't know how you do it, being gone all the time." I didn't answer. I focused on my plate the way I'd been trained to do when conversations went nowhere productive. Eat, listen, observe. My mother broke the silence. "Vanessa's been under a lot of stress lately." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "It's fine, Mom. I don't want to dump all that on Alyssa the minute she walks in." I looked up then. "You can talk about whatever you want. I'm not fragile." My father glanced at me. "No one said you were. No one ever did. They just acted like I wasn't supposed to need anything." They talked about Vanessa's work, her clients, the apartment she'd been thinking of moving out of. My mother asked if she'd eaten lunch. My father reminded her about a call she needed to return. The conversation moved around me, like furniture being rearranged in a room I didn't own. At one point, Vanessa leaned back and studied me. "So what's next for you? Another base? Another deployment?" "Nothing immediate," I said. "I'm assigned where I am for now." "For now," she repeated like it was a warning. "I don't know how you plan a life like that." "I don't plan it," I said. "I live it." She smiled thinly. "That sounds exhausting." "It's structured," I said. "There's a difference." My father cleared his throat. "Vanessa's just worried about you. We all are." That almost made me laugh. Almost. After dinner, my mother insisted on dessert. Vanessa helped her in the kitchen, laughing as they argued over whether the pie needed more time. I stood at the sink, rinsing my plate, listening to them talk about a weekend trip they'd taken together a few months back. No one had mentioned it to me. I'd been stateside then. Available. It hadn't come up. My father joined me, drying his hands on a towel. "You don't have to stay here while you're in town," he said quietly. "You know that." "I know," I said. "I already have a place." He paused. "Right. Your place in the city." I nodded. "Yes." He didn't say anything else, but something in his expression shifted. Not irritation. More like calculation, though I didn't have a reason to call it that yet. Later, as I grabbed my bag to head out, my mother hugged me stiffly. "Try not to be a stranger," she said. "I'm standing right here," I said. She laughed like I'd made a joke. Vanessa waved from the couch. "Drive safe." "I always do." Outside, the air felt cooler than it should have for the season. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the quiet settle. Being in uniform had never made me feel powerful in that house. It just reminded me how different my life was from the one they'd chosen to invest in. As I pulled away, my phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. Let me know if you want to grab coffee while you're in town. I stared at it for a second, then put the phone face down on the seat. The road ahead was clear, the city lights steady in the distance. I drove toward my place without rushing, already slipping back into the rhythm that made sense to me. I unlocked the front door of my condo and let it swing shut behind me, the click of the lock landing softer than I expected. The city noise faded instantly, replaced by a quiet that didn't ask anything from me. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the entry and stood there for a second, just breathing, letting my shoulders finally loosen. The lights came on with a tap of the switch. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the river, the water dark and steady, reflecting the glow of street lamps below. It was late, but the place still felt awake in its own way. Calm, neutral, like it was waiting without judgment. I kicked off my boots and lined them up by the wall muscle memory from years of inspections. The uniform jacket went over the back of the chair, not because I planned to wear it again that night, but because that chair had always felt like the right place for important things. I moved through the space slowly, not touring it, just existing in it. The couch by the window, the low shelf of books, the piano in the corner that no one ever played, but everyone dusted carefully like it mattered that much. This was the only place in my life where nothing had been rearranged to suit someone else. The kitchen still smelled faintly like lemon from the cleaner I'd used that morning. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching the reflection of my own movement in the dark window. Back at my parents' house, every surface had been covered in something Vanessa liked. Here, everything had been chosen deliberately, even the empty space. I set the glass down and walked into the study. The chair by the window was where my grandfather used to sit, one hand resting on the arm, the other holding whatever book he'd been reading that week. He'd never rushed through anything, not conversations, not decisions. He believed speed was overrated. He'd lived here longer than I'd been alive. When I was younger, he'd bring me into the city on weekends, say we needed to stretch our legs, even though we usually didn't go anywhere. We'd sit in that room, him reading me, pretending to do homework, both of us perfectly fine with the quiet. He never asked me why I'd chosen the army. He just nodded when I told him like it fit. Like he'd expected it. You like systems, he'd said once. Clear rules, clear outcomes. I hadn't realized how rare that kind of understanding was until it stopped being there. The condo wasn't flashy. People assumed it was because of the address. But my grandfather had never been interested in impressing anyone. He liked solid furniture, real wood, things that lasted longer than trends. When the paperwork came through after he passed, everything had been clear. No disputes, no fine print. The attorney had slid the documents across the table and said, "This is yours." He was very specific. Very specific was an understatement. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the folder where I kept the copies of the deed and the probate order. I didn't need to look at them. I knew what they said. But holding them grounded me in a way nothing else did. This wasn't a favor. It wasn't temporary. It wasn't something that could be negotiated at a dinner table. I slid the folder back and sat down in the chair, turning it slightly toward the window. The river moved steadily below, unbothered by whatever conversations were happening in other apartments, other houses, other families. It reminded me of how things looked from the air at night. Organized, distant, manageable. My phone buzzed again on the desk. Another message from Vanessa. "Seriously, coffee would be good. We never get time anymore." I didn't pick it up. I let it sit there, face down, until the screen went dark again. Vanessa had always been good at framing things as closeness. We should catch up. We never talk. It was a way of pretending distance was mutual instead of something she benefited from. When we were kids, she got what she wanted by being agreeable. When that stopped working, she learned to sound concerned. I stood and walked out onto the balcony. The air was cooler there, the city sharp and clean. My grandfather had planted a small lemon tree in a large pot years ago, stubbornly insisting it would survive the winters if he brought it inside at the right time. Against all odds, it had. The branches were thicker now, the leaves glossy and healthy. He'd taken care of things, not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. Back inside, I checked the mail slot by the door. Mostly flyers, a water bill. Nothing urgent. I stacked it neatly on the counter and moved through the apartment, turning off lights I didn't need. There was comfort in the routine, It reminded me that this place wasn't a reward or a backup plan. It was the result of someone seeing me clearly and acting on it. At my parents' house, I'd always been told I was independent, capable. You don't need help, my mother liked to say, usually right before offering Vanessa more of it. Independence sounded like praise, but it came with expectations. Don't ask. Don't complain. Don't make things complicated. Here, independence didn't feel like isolation. It felt like permission. I changed into jeans and a t-shirt and sat back down at the desk, opening my laptop to check work emails. Nothing pressing. A reminder about a meeting scheduled for next month. Another note about travel approvals that might come up later in the year. Normal things. Predictable things. I closed the laptop and leaned back, listening to the hum of the building around me. Pipes, elevators, the faint sound of a neighbor's TV somewhere down the hall. All of it blended into a background that didn't demand explanation. This was the only place I didn't have to justify why I lived the way I did. I picked up my phone not to respond to Vanessa, but to set it on silent. The screen went dark again, and I placed it in the drawer beside the desk out of sight. The night stretched on without urgency. I stood, turned off the last light, and let the apartment settle into its own rhythm, steady and uncomplicated, exactly the way my grandfather had intended. The drawer closed with a soft tap, and I left the phone there as I went to bed, letting the quiet do what it always did, clear the noise without asking permission. By morning, the condo felt the same as it had the night before, orderly and different to anyone else's expectations. I made coffee, stood by the window, and watched the river carry whatever it wanted past my line of sight. Vanessa's messages didn't stop. I knew they wouldn't. She had a way of filling space when she sensed someone pulling back. By noon, there were 3 texts and 1 missed call. None of them said anything urgent. They didn't need to. The urgency lived underneath. I spent the afternoon doing things that had nothing to do with family. Groceries, laundry, a long walk along the river. When I got back, there was a voicemail waiting. This one was from my mother. "Call me when you have a minute," she said. "Vanessa's dealing with a lot right now." I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand, then set it back on the counter without responding. The pattern was familiar. Vanessa struggled. My parents mobilized. Everyone else adjusted. Later that evening, I drove back to my parents' place. Not because I felt obligated, but because ignoring things didn't stop them from moving. I preferred to know where the ground was shifting. The house looked the same as it had the night before. Lights on, curtains open. The door unlocked, as if no one imagined a reason to be cautious. Vanessa's car was in the driveway. Inside, the mood had changed, not tense, focused. My mother sat at the dining table with a stack of papers, glasses perched on her nose. My father paced near the counterphone pressed to his ear. Vanessa was at the table, scrolling, her leg bouncing under the chair. "Hey," I said. My mother looked up. "You came." "I live nearby," I said. "It's not a trip." My father ended his call and nodded at me. "We're just talking through some things." Vanessa didn't look up. "It's not a big deal," she said. "I just need some time." Time was her favorite word. It made everything sound temporary. My mother pushed one of the papers toward me. Vanessa's credit card company called again. I glanced at the page. Numbers, interest rates, minimum payments that didn't match the balance. "Okay. She's been trying to handle it herself," my mother said quickly, like she was defending a position. "But the market's been rough." "I thought you said her clients were solid," I said. Vanessa finally looked up. They were. Some of them changed direction. "It happens." My father crossed his arms. "The point is, she's under pressure." I nodded. Pressure was not new. What came next usually was. "We're just trying to figure out the best way forward," my mother said. "As a family." Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "I don't want this to turn into a whole thing." I waited. Letting silence do the work had become second nature. My father cleared his throat. "We thought maybe you'd have some perspective." "On what I said exactly?" Vanessa exhaled. "On options." Options. Another word that did a lot of work without saying much. "What kind of options?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. Restructuring? Consolidation? Maybe selling something?" My mother's eyes flicked toward my father, then back to me. "You've always been good with planning." I almost smiled. That was new. Or at least newly useful. "I plan for my job," I said, "not other people's finances." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking you to fix it." "No," I said. You're asking me to weigh in. My father stepped in. We're not trying to put this on you. Then don't, I said. Vanessa rolled her eyes. You don't have to get defensive. I met her gaze. I'm not. I'm being clear. The room shifted slightly, like furniture being nudged an inch to the left. My mother gathered the papers back into a neat stack. We're just worried about her. I get that, I said. But worry doesn't create money. Vanessa scoffed. Easy to say when you're not the one dealing with it. Actually, I said it's easy to say when you are. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father watched us closely, the way he did when conversations got uncomfortable. There's no rush, my mother said too quickly. We just wanted to talk. I stood. Then we've talked. Vanessa looked surprised. You're leaving? Yes. She frowned. That was fast. I'm not staying to workshop your stress, I said. If you have a plan, follow it. My father sighed. You don't have to be like this. Like what I asked. Detached. I thought of my uniform jacket hanging on the chair back at home. Of systems and rules and outcomes. I'm consistent, I said. There's a difference. On my way out, Vanessa called after me. You always do this. You show up, say your piece, and disappear. I paused at the door. I don't disappear, I said. I just don't orbit. Driving back to the condo, I replayed the conversation in pieces. The words they'd chosen, the ones they hadn't. Selling something. Options. Perspective. None of it had included a request. It was positioning. Back home, I set my keys down and opened the balcony door. The air had cooled. The city hummed at a low frequency, unbothered by family meetings and financial anxiety. I stood there longer than I needed to, thinking about how easily concern slid into expectation. Vanessa didn't need a solution yet. She needed alignment. And alignment in my family had always meant moving in one direction toward her. I closed the door and locked it, not because I felt unsafe, but because the habit felt right. Inside the condo remained unchanged exactly as I'd left it. I poured another glass of water, set it on the counter, and let the evening settle around me, aware of how quickly priorities could shift when someone decided they mattered more than the rest. I left the balcony door locked and carried the glass of water into the bedroom, setting it on the nightstand before changing out of my clothes. The quiet followed me unbroken, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts clearly, whether you want to or not. I slept lightly the way I always did, in unfamiliar weeks, waking before my alarm with the sense that something had shifted without announcing itself. By mid-morning, I was back in my routine. Gym, emails, a quick call with my unit's admin about paperwork that needed signatures while I was stateside. Normal things, predictable things, the kind that made everything else feel manageable. Around noon, my mother texted, "Can you stop by later? Vanessa's here. We want to talk." I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "I can swing by." I didn't add anything else. No smiley faces, no reassurance, just the facts. Their house was quieter than usual when I arrived. No music, no TV. The front door was closed but unlocked. I stepped inside without knocking, the way I always had growing up, and paused in the entryway. Voices drifted in from the kitchen. Low, focused. Not the kind of conversation meant to be shared. I took one step forward, then stopped. Not out of caution exactly, more out of instinct. Years of training had taught me when to hold position and listen. My father spoke first. "If she's gone for 3 weeks, that's more than enough time." My mother answered immediately. "We'll need to coordinate it carefully. I don't want any mistakes." Vanessa's voice cut in sharper than the others. "She won't know. She never checks in." I leaned back against the wall, my hand still on the strap of my bag. "We can call a locksmith," my father said. "Explain it's a family situation, that the owner's away." My mother exhaled. "Once the place is cleared out, we can list it quickly. The market's still strong." Vanessa laughed softly. "It's $1 million unit, at least." The words landed cleanly. No ambiguity, no hedging. My father continued, "That would cover the debt, give you breathing room. And a fresh start," my mother added. I felt my pulse pick up, not racing, just steady and deliberate. The way it did before decisions. "What about her stuff?" Vanessa asked. "We can't just dump it." "We'll box it," my mother said. "Storage unit, temporary." "Temporary," Vanessa repeated. "Right." My father lowered his voice, but not enough. "We'll say she agreed to let us handle it while she's traveling. And if she asks questions," my mother said. Vanessa scoffed. "She won't. She never does." I stood there, the hallway narrowing around me. They weren't speculating. They weren't venting. They were assigning tasks. Jenna can help, my father said. She lives close and she's practical. We'll tell her it's just until things settle. My mother hesitated. I don't want this to blow up. It won't, Vanessa said. She'll understand eventually. Eventually, another favorite word. I stepped back quietly, my shoes barely making a sound on the floor. The front door closed behind me, with the same soft click I'd heard at my condo the night before. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, the air too open. I got into my car and sat there, hands on the wheel, letting the conversation replay without emotion. The details were clear. Timeline, method, outcome. They were waiting for me to be gone, counting on distance to do their work for them. They weren't worried about legality, or consent, or what my grandfather had put in writing with witnesses and signatures. They were worried about Vanessa. I drove home on autopilot, traffic flowing around me like it always did. At a red light, I realized my hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected anger or shock, or something sharp and immediate. Instead, I felt clarity. Back in the condo, I set my bag down and walked straight to the desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out the folder again, laying the papers out neatly. Deed, probate order, attorney's letter. Everything clean, everything final. I took out my phone and opened the voice recorder. My thumb hovered for a second before I tapped it, replaying the recording from earlier that afternoon. I'd started it without thinking when I realized what I was hearing, the habit automatic. The voices were clear, names used, plans stated plainly. I saved the file twice, once to the cloud, once to a secure drive. Then I sat back and considered my options. Not emotionally, logistically. Confrontation would do nothing. It would push them to adjust, to hide, to speed up. Doing nothing would invite exactly what they described. So I chose the third option. I opened my calendar and blocked off 3 weeks in bold. Travel authorization pending. I drafted an email to my supervisor about a potential overseas meeting tied to a joint training observation. Plausible, routine, nothing that raised eyebrows. Next, I texted my mother. I might be traveling for work soon. I'll confirm dates after tomorrow. Her response came quickly. Of course, let us know. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The river moved the same way it always did, indifferent to plans made in kitchens and hallways. From this height, everything looked orderly. Cause and effect, input and output. My grandfather's voice came back to me unprompted. Think several moves ahead. Don't show your hand until the board is set. I didn't feel clever or triumphant. I felt focused. I closed the desk drawer, not locking it, just aligning it flush with the frame. Then I went about the rest of my evening as usual. Dinner, a few emails, a short workout. Later, as the city lights came on, my phone buzzed again. Vanessa. Mom said you might be going out of town. That's exciting. I looked at the message, then typed back, work trip. I'll be away for a bit. There was a pause before her reply. We should catch up before you go. I set the phone face down on the desk and turned off the light. The condo settled into silence, unchanged and observant. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, not replaying what I'd heard, but organizing what came next, choosing not to move until every piece was exactly where it needed to be. I stayed still for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, then reached over and set the phone back in the drawer without turning it face up. Lying there, I didn't rehearse conversations or imagine confrontations. I ran through steps, sequence, timing. What could be observed? What could be verified? What would stand on its own, without my opinion attached? By morning, the plan was already clean in my head. I started with the calendar. 3 weeks blocked in a way that looked ordinary. Not dramatic, not rushed. I sent the follow-up email to my supervisor, confirming the overseas observation window, and attached the draft agenda I'd prepared. It was routine enough to be approved without comment. When the confirmation came back an hour later, I didn't feel relief, just alignment. Next came the apartment. I walked the condo slowly, not admiring it, but mapping it. Entry, hallway, living room, kitchen, study, bedroom, balcony. I noted sight lines, door swings, blind spots. Years of base housing inspections had trained me to see spaces this way, where people naturally paused, where they hurried, where they assumed privacy. I didn't rush to buy anything. I'd already done the research weeks earlier, back when my grandfather's estate had finalized, and I'd thought about worst-case scenarios in a detached theoretical way. The cameras I ordered were small legal and designed for private residences in Illinois. No gray areas, no hidden microphones. Clear notices in the app. Cloud storage with timestamps that couldn't be edited. They arrived that afternoon. I waited until evening when the building's traffic slowed, then took the service elevator up the box tucked under my arm. Inside the condo, I worked methodically. One camera near the entry, angled to capture the lock and the immediate interior. One in the hallway, covering movement toward the bedroom and study. One in the living room, wide enough to see the main space without intruding on anything private. Each one blended easily into the room, nothing out of place. I tested them twice, walked in and out, turned lights on and off, checked audio clarity. The app logged everything automatically. When I was done, I sat at the desk and watched the live feed for a full 10 minutes, just to make sure there were no gaps. Only then did I move on. I called the non-emergency line for the Chicago Police Department from the kitchen, the phone on speaker, my voice steady. When an officer picked up, I explained the situation plainly. Property owner, credible threat of unauthorized entry, evidence already recorded, no speculation, just facts. He asked for details. I gave them. Address, ownership. The conversation I'd overheard. The mention of a locksmith. The expected window. I offered to share the recording and the live feed if needed. He listened without interrupting, then told me to email the file and the documentation. If they attempt entry, he said, call us immediately. With what you're describing, we can respond quickly. I thanked him and hung up, then sent the email with everything attached. The confirmation came back minutes later. Case number assigned. Notes entered. I didn't feel like I'd crossed a line. I felt like I'd marked one. The next step was perception. I packed a small suitcase and left it by the bedroom door, visible from the hallway camera. Not staged, just present. I forwarded my mail temporarily and set an auto-reply on my work email, indicating limited access due to travel. I scheduled the lights to cycle the way they always did, and made sure the building concierge had my usual delivery instructions. Everything looked normal because it was. At dinner that night, I stopped by my parents' house again. Vanessa was there, getting closer to the edge of her seat than usual. My mother fussed over the food. My father asked about my travel plans with the casual tone of someone pretending not to listen too closely. London first, I said, passing the bread. Then a few days on the continent. My mother paused. That's a long trip. It's work, I said, not a vacation. Vanessa smiled. Still, Europe's nice. It's efficient, I said. That's why they picked it. My father nodded. When do you leave? Friday, I said. Early. The room absorbed that quietly. Who's checking on your place? My mother asked, trying to sound offhand. No one needs to, I said. The building handles things. Vanessa tilted her head. What about your plants? They're on timers. And packages? Concierge. She frowned slightly. What if something happens? I met her eyes. Then it gets logged. She looked away first. Dinner moved on. Dessert? Small talk? My mother hugged me again at the door, tighter this time. Vanessa told me to text when I landed. I will, I said. Back at the condo, I checked the feeds again. Everything was quiet, as expected. The next day, I checked into a hotel a few miles away. Nothing fancy. A business place near the river. I paid with a card not linked to my home address and requested a room with a desk and a strong Wi-Fi signal. The clerk handed me the key without looking up. From the room, I could see the city stretch out in clean lines. I set up my laptop, opened the camera app, and arranged the windows so I could monitor everything without effort. Notifications on. Sound muted. Recording continuous. The waiting began. I kept my routine. Work emails, short walks along the river path, meals at odd hours. Every so often, the app pinged. Building maintenance. A neighbor passing too close to my door. Normal movement. I slept lightly, the way I always did, when something important was in motion. On the second evening, my mother called. I let it ring twice before answering. Just checking in, she said. Did you get settled? Yes, I said. Everything okay? Everything's fine. She hesitated. You sound busy. I am. After we hung up, I watched the hallway feed for a long moment. Nothing moved. The lock remained untouched. I didn't feel nervous, I felt prepared. Years in uniform had taught me that control didn't come from force. It came from patience documentation and letting people act exactly the way they intended to. I closed the laptop for the night, set the phone on the desk, and lay back on the bed, listening to the steady hum of traffic below, confident that the system was now in place and working quietly the way it was designed to. The phone vibrated once on the desk, a short buzz that blended into the traffic noise outside, and I reached over without sitting up, checking the screen before the sound could register as anything else. A motion alert. Hallway. False alarm. Someone passing too close, nothing more. I set the phone back down and stayed where I was, eyes on the ceiling, letting the rhythm of waiting settle in. Morning came quietly. I dressed, grabbed coffee from the lobby, and took it back to the room, setting the cup beside the laptop before opening the feeds. The condo looked exactly the same as when I'd left it. Lights cycling on schedule. Shadows shifting with the day. No hands on the lock. No unfamiliar shapes crossing the frame. I answered emails and reviewed documents for work, the normal kind that didn't care where I was physically located. Waiting didn't mean stopping. It meant staying available without revealing yourself. Around mid-morning, Vanessa texted, "Did you make it okay?" I typed back, "Landed early. Long day." The lie was clean because it was simple. "Send pics," she replied. I didn't. I spent the afternoon walking the river path near the hotel phone in my pocket, notifications on low. The air had that early fall edge to it, crisp enough to keep me alert. I passed joggers, office workers on lunch breaks, couples arguing quietly. Everyone had somewhere to be. No one was watching me. Back in the room, I pulled the chair closer to the desk and adjusted the laptop angle. The hallway feed stayed open in the corner of the screen. I didn't stare at it constantly. I glanced when it changed. That was enough. The first real shift came late that evening, a call from my mother. I answered after the second ring. "Just wanted to check in again," she said. "You're really busy." "Yes," I said. She hesitated. "Your building's been sending out notices about maintenance." "I get those," I said. "Oh." A pause. I just thought, I have it handled. Another pause, longer this time. "You always do." I let the silence sit. She filled it by asking about my flight back. I gave a date that sounded flexible without being vague. We hung up with polite goodbyes that didn't commit either of us to anything. Afterward, I sat back and watched the feed for 10 full minutes. Still nothing. The second day passed the same way. Small movements, no approach. The building's cleaning staff paused near my door cart, squeaking softly, then moved on. A neighbor stepped into frame, checked their phone, left. The lock remained untouched. At dinner, I ate alone in the hotel restaurant, the kind of place where no one noticed if you stayed longer than necessary. My phone buzzed again. "Vanessa, Mom says you didn't give her a spare key." I read the message once, then again. I typed, "There's no spare." A few seconds passed. "That seems risky." "The building isn't," I replied. Another pause, then just saying. I set the phone down and finished my meal. That night, sleep came in short stretches. Each time I woke, I checked the screen, saw the same static image of the hallway, and closed my eyes again. The waiting wasn't anxious. It was focused, like holding a position until the signal came through. On the third morning, the hotel room phone rang. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Alyssa," my father said. "Quick question." "Yes," I said. "We were talking about your place," he continued. "Hypothetically." I leaned back in the chair. "Okay. If something happened while you were away," he said, choosing his words carefully, "who would we contact?" "The concierge," I said, "or building security. And if they couldn't reach you, they log it." Another pause. "Right. Is there something specific you're asking?" I said. "Or is this just conversation?" He cleared his throat. "Just checking in." After we hung up, I didn't move. I watched the hallway feed until my coffee went cold. Still nothing. By the afternoon, the pattern was clear. They were testing edges, looking for openings that didn't exist. The waiting wasn't frustrating them yet. It was making them cautious. That evening, I left the hotel briefly to pick up dinner and returned before dark. The app pinged while I was unlocking my room. Motion detected, lobby. I opened, sheathed the feed. A familiar car pulled up outside my building, my mother's. She stayed inside, engine running, phone to her ear. After a minute, Vanessa's car arrived behind it. They didn't get out. I watched as they sat there talking, gesturing. Then Vanessa stepped out, walked to the front door, and paused. She looked up at the security camera above the entrance, then back at the car. She didn't go in. The cars pulled away a few minutes later. I closed the app and sat down on the bed, the weight of the moment registering fully for the first time. They were close. Not in the abstract. Physically close. Close enough to act. I called the police non-emergency line again and referenced the case number. They've scouted the location, I said. No entry yet. The officer thanked me for the update and told me to call immediately if the situation changed. Back at the desk, I opened my email and saw a message from my supervisor confirming the travel window had been officially logged. Another piece in place. Vanessa texted later that night. "We stopped by your building. Everything looks quiet." I replied, "It usually is." She didn't respond. I lay back again, the same position as the night before, traffic humming below. Waiting wasn't passive. It was deliberate. Every minute they hesitated gave me more certainty. Every test they ran confirmed what I already knew. At home, waiting had always been something done to me. Waiting for attention. Waiting for approval. Waiting to be considered. Here, waiting was something I chose. The phone stayed on the desk screen, dark alerts armed. I didn't imagine what they would do next. I didn't need to. All I had to do was stay still and let them follow the plan they'd already decided on, confident that the moment they stopped waiting and started acting, everything would be recorded exactly as it happened. The notification came through while I was standing at the window, watching a barge cut slowly across the river. I didn't move right away. I waited for the second vibration that confirmed it wasn't a glitch, then crossed the room and picked up the phone. Motion detected, exterior camera. I opened the feed. A white van rolled into frame and stopped just short of the curb. The logo on the side was plain and local, the kind you see everywhere and never remember. The driver stepped out with a tool bag slung over his shoulder and looked up at the building, checking the address against his phone. I sat down. A second later, my father's car pulled in behind the van. My mother was in the passenger seat, hands folded tightly in her lap. They didn't get out right away. My father spoke to the locksmith through the window, gesturing toward the entrance. Then Vanessa's car appeared. She parked quickly, like she was late for something important. She stepped out before the engine fully shut off, phone in hand, scanning the building, as if she expected resistance. When she saw the locksmith, she smiled and waved him over. I didn't feel surprised. I felt focused. The lobby camera picked them up next. My father walked slightly ahead, confident, already explaining something. My mother hovered close, her eyes flicking toward the elevator bank. Vanessa lagged behind for half a second, tapping out a message, then caught up. The locksmith hesitated at the front desk. The concierge wasn't there. Shift change. Vanessa leaned in, said something I couldn't hear, and pointed toward the elevators. They went up together. The hallway feed switched on as the elevator doors opened on my floor. The lighting was exactly as I'd left it. Neutral. Bright enough to see everything clearly. The locksmith stepped out first, scanning the doors, then paused when Vanessa pointed directly at mine. She walked ahead of my parents and stopped in front of the door. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She folded her arms and waited while the locksmith set down his bag. My father stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, trying to look casual. My mother stayed a step back, clutching a stack of flattened boxes against her chest. The locksmith knelt and examined the smart lock. He tried something on his tablet. The screen reflected faintly in the hallway camera. He shook his head once, then began working more deliberately. I watched his hands move, precise and practiced. He wasn't breaking anything. He was doing what he'd been hired to do. Vanessa glanced back toward the elevator, then down the hall, then back at the door. She said something to my mother, who nodded quickly. The lock clicked. Vanessa reached for the handle before anyone else. The door opened inward, slow and quiet, and she stepped inside like she belonged there. I exhaled once, then picked up the phone and dialed. Chicago Police non-emergency, the dispatcher said. I gave the case number first. Then the address, then the update. They've entered the property with a hired locksmith, I said. The feed is live. Units are nearby, she replied. Stay on the line. Inside the condo, the camera caught Vanessa dropping her keys on the entry table, the sound sharp even through the recording. She kicked off her shoes without thinking, muscle memory, revealing how little she believed this was wrong. My father followed her in looking around, as if he were inspecting a hotel room. Okay, he said, voice low but clear. Let's move. My mother went straight toward the bedroom. Vanessa headed for the living room shelves. She pulled books out quickly, stacking them without care. "We don't need these," she said. "Just box them." Jenna arrived moments later, stepping into frame with a hesitant pause. She looked from my father to my mother, then at Vanessa already at work. "I thought this was temporary," she said. "It is," Vanessa replied, "just until things settle." Jenna picked up a roll of packing paper and moved toward the kitchen, her movements stiff. My father pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yes," he said quietly. "We can schedule photos for tomorrow. It's vacant now." Vacant. The word landed harder than anything else. The officers arrived less than 3 minutes later. The hallway camera caught them as they approached uniforms, unmistakable posture alert. They knocked once firm and loud. "Chicago police," one of them said. "Open the door." Inside, everything stopped. My mother dropped the box she was holding. The sound of dishes clattering echoed through the condo. Vanessa froze mid-motion, a framed photo still in her hands. Jenna stepped back, her face draining of color. My father moved toward the door, smoothing his shirt. "There's been a misunderstanding," he began as he opened it. The officer stepped inside, eyes scanning the room. One of them raised a hand. "Everyone, step back." "What is this about, my mother?" asked her voice tight. "Unauthorized entry," the officer said. "We have evidence and a live report from the property owner." Vanessa laughed short and sharp. "This is family." The officer didn't look at her. "That doesn't grant access." They separated everyone calmly, professionally. IDs were requested, names confirmed. The locksmith was called back from the elevator and questioned separately. The boxes on the floor were photographed, the disturbed shelves, the open drawers. My father tried again. "She gave us permission." The officer nodded once. "We'll need to see that." The recording played next. The conversation from the kitchen. Clear voices, clear intent. No room to reinterpret. Vanessa's shoulders slumped as the words echoed through the room. My mother covered her mouth with one hand. Jenna stared at the floor. "This will be documented," the officer said. "You'll need to leave the property immediately." "What about our things?" my mother asked. "Nothing here belongs to you," he replied. They were escorted out in the same order they'd come in. Vanessa walked last, her face, tight eyes flicking once toward the camera above the door, as if she'd just realized it had been there all along. The door closed behind them. The condo fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that settles after something irreversible has already happened. I stayed on the line until the officer confirmed they'd cleared the building and logged the incident. When the call ended, I didn't move. I watched the empty hallway feed for a long moment. The light steady, the lock intact, the space unchanged except for the boxes left behind, evidence of how easily they'd assumed access. Outside my hotel window, the river kept moving, indifferent and precise, carrying the night forward without pause, as everything I'd put in motion continued to unfold exactly as it had been set. I stayed seated at the desk after the call ended, the phone still warm in my hand, watching the live feed as if something else might happen if I blinked. Nothing did. The hallway light remained steady. The door stayed shut. The boxes they'd brought in sat exactly where the officers had told them to leave them, half-packed proof of intent, without a single word attached. I didn't rush back. That choice mattered more than it might sound. Instead, I shut the laptop, stood, and walked down to the hotel lobby to get coffee. The barista asked how my morning was going. I said it was busy. That was true enough. By the time I returned to the room, my phone had 3 missed calls. 2 from my mother, 1 from my father. No messages, just the expectation that I would pick up. I didn't. I reopened the laptop and pulled up the police report link the officer had sent. Timestamps, names. Description of forced entry via hired locksmith. Photographs attached. Officer notes written in clean, neutral language that didn't care about birthdays or shared holidays. The system didn't ask how they felt. It recorded what they did. An hour later, the building management emailed me directly. They'd been notified by police and wanted confirmation on next steps. I replied with a single sentence. Please update access logs and note that no one other than myself is authorized to enter the unit. They responded within minutes. Confirmation logged. Security notified. Locks flagged. Everything moved efficiently once family stopped being part of the equation. I returned to the feed periodically, watching maintenance staff place a temporary notice on my door for documentation purposes, then remove it once they'd taken photos. The condo looked untouched now, as if it had simply observed and recorded rather than participated. Late that afternoon, Jenna texted, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand what was happening. I read it twice before replying. I know. That was all. I didn't ask questions. I didn't offer reassurance. I wasn't interested in sorting intentions from actions. Jenna had followed along until the system intervened. That line mattered. By evening, the calls turned into voicemails. My mother cried in the first one. She said she didn't recognize how things had gotten so far. She said she was just trying to help. She said family shouldn't involve police. My father's message came later. His voice was controlled tight around the edges. He said lawyers would be calling. He said this didn't have to be public. He said I'd overreacted. I deleted both without responding. The next morning, I went back to the condo. The building felt different when I walked in, not hostile, just alert. The concierge nodded, his expression neutral but attentive. "Everything okay now?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It is." Upstairs, the door opened easily. Inside, the air was still. The boxes sat near the entry unopened since the police had left. I moved them to the corner without looking inside, then walked through each room once slow and deliberate. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. Nothing had been changed beyond the fact that it had been tested. I opened the desk drawer and checked the folder. Still there. Exactly where I'd left it. I slid it back into place and closed the drawer. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from the police portal. The report had been finalized. Citations issued. Locksmith statement attached. The case wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was complete. By midday, the news had spread in the way these things always do in dense cities. Not headlines, not articles, conversations, building message boards, a few anonymous posts warning others to secure their units after a family dispute escalated. Someone knocked on my door mid-afternoon. Building security. They wanted to confirm I'd be available if anyone tried to return. I thanked them and said I would be. They never did. That night, I cooked dinner for the first time since everything happened. Nothing fancy. Pasta, a salad. Food that didn't require attention. I ate at the counter, the city lights reflecting off the window, and let the quiet settle back into its familiar shape. Another message came in, this time from Vanessa. "You didn't have to do this." I set the phone down without answering and finished my meal. Later, I checked the feed one last time before bed. The hallway remained empty. The lock untouched, the system steady. I slept deeply for the first time in days. In the morning, I woke to an email from a law firm I recognized. My parents' attorney. The subject line was formal restrained. Notice of intent to contest estate distribution. I forwarded it to my own attorney, without opening it, adding a brief note, FYI. Police report attached. Her reply came quickly. They don't have much to work with. That was the most emotion anyone needed to show. Over the next few days, everything unfolded at the same measured pace. Depositions scheduled. Statements requested. Dates assigned. The process didn't speed up for anger or slow down for regret. It moved forward, indifferent and precise. I stayed in the condo, worked remotely, took calls when necessary, declined when they weren't. The building staff treated me with quiet respect, the kind reserved for people who'd drawn a line and held it. Vanessa tried once more to call. I let it go to voicemail. My parents stopped leaving messages altogether. When my attorney called to walk me through what would happen next, she didn't soften anything. She didn't need to. The will was clear, the evidence was clean, the unauthorized entry was documented. There were no gray areas left to argue over. When the call ended, I stood by the window again, watching the river move past, as it always had. Nothing about the view had changed. The difference was internal structural, like a load-bearing wall finally doing the work it had been designed for. Family had spoken loudly for years. This time, the system spoke louder, and it didn't require my voice to do it. The attorney's voice was still in my ear when I closed the laptop and stood up from the desk, the room quiet enough to hear the building's HVAC cycle on. I didn't pace. I didn't sit back down. I walked to the window and watched the river for a minute, then turned back to the table and started organizing what would need to be sent where in what order without commentary. The first notice went out that afternoon. Formal, neutral. My attorney acknowledged receipt of their intent to contest and attached the police report, the locksmith statement, the building access logs, and the recording transcript. No editorial, no warning, just the record. The response came 2 days later. A longer email, more words, fewer facts. They claimed misunderstanding. They claimed urgency. They claimed family consent implied by history. The language bent around the absence of evidence, trying to make room where there wasn't any. My attorney forwarded it to me with a single line, "We'll let the court handle tone." The court did. Dates were set. Filings exchanged. Discovery requests came in broad and hopeful fishing for something that might complicate a document that had already been executed cleanly. Each request was answered with exactly what was asked for, and nothing more. The will, the notarization, the medical attestation of capacity, the timeline. There was no room for interpretation. Mais ideen, only for expense. Vanessa felt it first. She called once early before the process hardened. I didn't answer. She left a message that started angry and ended thin. She said I'd embarrassed the family. She said I'd gone nuclear. She said no one would forget this. A week later, she emailed from a personal account subject line empty. She said her employer had asked questions. She said HR didn't like seeing her name attached to police reports, even indirectly. She said it wasn't fair that my choices were affecting her career. I forwarded it to my attorney. Not because it mattered legally, but because it documented the shift. Within a month, the questions became meetings. The meetings became restructuring. The explanation was clean and impersonal. Vanessa was let go with a severance that didn't stretch far enough to matter. Her LinkedIn updated quietly. Freelance. Open to opportunities. My parents moved next. They hired a second attorney, then a third. Each one billed by the hour and asked the same questions the last one had already answered. They tried to frame intent as mitigation. They tried to argue emotional equity. They tried to suggest that family dynamics complicated ownership. The judge disagreed. At the preliminary hearing, the ruling was short. No undue influence, no ambiguity, no standing to redistribute a legally executed estate. Costs assigned. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gavel slam, just a conclusion. Outside the courthouse, my father didn't look at me. My mother did once, her expression searching for something she could still say that might move the ground under my feet. I gave her a nod and kept walking. The bill arrived 2 weeks later. Court costs, attorney fees, filing penalties. The number wasn't ruinous, but it was heavy enough to change habits. They sold an investment to cover it. Canceled a trip they'd talked about for years. Quietly stepped back from the community board my father had chaired, citing personal reasons. People noticed. They always do. The building's message board stayed active for a while, then moved on to other topics. Packages, noise complaints, a lost cat. The incident became background knowledge, the kind that surfaces only when someone asks how well you know your neighbors. At work, nothing changed for me. My supervisor asked if everything was settled. I said it was in progress. He nodded and moved on to scheduling. That steadiness mattered more than I expected. Jenna reached out again this time, asking to talk. She said she hadn't understood what she was being asked to help with. She said she'd believed it was temporary access. She said the police had shaken her. I replied with a boundary that didn't invite negotiation. I'm not ready to reconnect. She accepted it without argument. Vanessa didn't. She showed up once unannounced in the building lobby. Security called me before letting her past the desk. I told them to deny access. She stood there for a minute, arguing quietly, then left. The second time she sent a message through my mother. It said she wanted closure. It said we needed to talk like adults. It said this wasn't how siblings treated each other. I archived it. The lawsuit dragged on just long enough to cost my parents more money without offering them leverage. Discovery closed. Motions were denied. The final hearing confirmed what had already been stated in writing. The estate stood. The property remained mine. The attempted entry was noted as part of the record. No appeal followed. When the last order came through, my attorney called me while I was at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables. I wiped my hands on a towel and listened. That's it, she said. They're done. Thank you, I said. After the call, I finished making dinner. The knife moved cleanly through what it needed to. Nothing felt heavy. Nothing felt celebratory. Later that night, I checked the drawer in the study, out of habit, and found an envelope tucked behind the file folders, its edge catching the light just enough to draw my attention. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and I hadn't been ready to see it. The handwriting on the front was careful and familiar. My name written the way my grandfather always wrote it. I didn't open it right away. I set the envelope on the desk and turned off the lights in the rest of the condo, letting the city glow do the work instead. Outside traffic moved in clean lines, people headed home with their own conclusions, already forming consequences, already settling into place, whether they recognized them or not. I sat down in the chair by the window, the envelope within reach, aware that everything the system could resolve had been resolved, and that what remained wasn't about outcomes anymore, but about understanding exactly what had been secured and at what cost. The envelope stayed where it was while I finished dinner, the paper resting flat on the desk like it had always belonged there. I didn't rush it. I washed the dishes, wiped the counter, and turned off the lights, one by one, moving through the condo the way I always did at the end of the day. When I finally sat down, the city had settled into its late rhythm, traffic thinning, voices fading into distance. I opened the envelope carefully, sliding the letter out without tearing the edge. My grandfather's handwriting filled the page, steady and deliberate, the ink slightly darker where he'd paused. He didn't start with apologies or explanations. He never did. He wrote about the view first, how the river changed color depending on the season, how the city looked different when you stopped trying to measure yourself against it. He said the condo had taught him patience long before it ever gave him comfort. Then he wrote about me. He said he'd watched how I moved through rooms growing up, how I listened more than I spoke, how I learned early not to expect things to be handed to me. He said he'd seen the way I worked quietly, without asking for permission to take responsibility. He said some people mistake that for distance, but he never had. He wrote that the condo wasn't a gift, it was a foundation, a place that didn't shift when other things did, a place where I wouldn't have to negotiate my worth. You were always capable, he wrote. I just wanted to make sure you had somewhere that recognized it. I read the letter once, then again, slower. The words landed cleanly without drama. There was no judgment of my parents, no mention of Vanessa, just clarity, just intention. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, then slid it into the desk drawer beside the documents. It belonged with them, not as proof, but as context. The next morning, I hung my uniform jacket in the closet next to civilian clothes that actually fit my life now. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because I was done separating parts of myself depending on where I was standing. Everything I needed was already in the room. I went back to work full-time the following week. Meetings resumed. Deadlines replaced legal timelines. My supervisor asked if I needed flexibility. I told him I didn't. He nodded and moved on. That was enough. The calls stopped entirely after that. My parents didn't reach out again. Vanessa's name disappeared from my notifications. Jenna respected the distance I'd asked for. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was practical, space forming where pressure used to sit. I made small changes to the condo, rearranged furniture, added plants to the balcony, turned the study into a workspace that made sense for how I actually lived, not how someone else thought I should. The piano stayed where it was. Some things didn't need to be useful to matter. Neighbors started recognizing me in the elevator. A nod, a brief smile, no questions. The building went back to being a building, not a stage. One evening, as I was leaving for a walk, I ran into the concierge. He asked if everything had settled. I said it had. He wished me a good night. We both meant it. Vanessa found work eventually. Freelance, short contracts, nothing permanent. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances who didn't realize I already knew. My parents downsized quietly a year later, sold the house, moved somewhere smaller. Practical decisions made late. None of it required my involvement. On a Sunday afternoon, I sat on the balcony, with coffee, watching the river carry a steady line of boats past the bend. The lemon tree my grandfather had planted needed pruning. I took my time with it, trimming carefully the way he had shown me. Leave enough growth to keep it strong. Remove what pulls energy away. That night, I wrote him back. Not because he could read it, but because I could. I thanked him for seeing me clearly. I told him the foundation held. I folded the note and placed it in the drawer with his letter not as a ritual, just as a habit. The condo felt complete in a way it hadn't before. Not finished, just settled. When people asked about my family, I answered simply, "We're not close." It was accurate. It didn't invite follow-up. What surprised me most wasn't the relief. It was how little anger I carried once everything stopped moving. The system had done its work. The rest was mine to decide. I locked the balcony door and turned off the lights, leaving the city glow to fill the room. Tomorrow would look a lot like today. Work, routine, space to think, space to rest. I set the alarm and went to bed without checking my phone, knowing that nothing was waiting to demand a response. The letter stayed in the drawer, the condo steady around me, the line I'd drawn holding firm, not because anyone else respected it, but because I did. If stories about family revenge inheritance and real family drama resonate with you, consider subscribing to the channel. These are stories about quiet strength, hard choices, and standing your ground when it matters most.